Kuro Gyarus are racist. So, hello everyone here. Today, I make a very good video, I feel, of course, before my darling comes out today, right? Reaction videos are coming up, right? Because a pretty last episode created a lot of controversy, right? Because apparently Marin-chan has to be cancelled now, right? Because, yeah, she's a racist now. And I really, and I honestly, right? Please share this video, because I'm very, very tired, right, of the actual racist people, right, complaining about Japanese people, mostly because they're ignorant, right? So as soon as you see a Gyaru, they're like, oh, that's racism, right? So making sense. Is Hibiki down behind me, right, you know? Beloved Hibiki, dumbbell. He's a Kuro Gyaru, right? Is that racism? I have this, like, Nagatoro poster, right? You know, Nagatoro is quite tanned. Is that racism? Because he's tanned? Right, so, and of course, I want to make this video a little more bigger, right? A lot of people talk about this controversy, so to speak. But I want to make a video here actually explaining what the Gyaru is, right? Explaining the different cultural tropes, explaining the evolution of the Gyaru, right? And so on, and you know, how you see it in a lot of different mangas and anime and so on, right? And of course, if a Kuro Gyaru especially, but generally the Gyaru is racist, then like every second anime or gaming and so on, right? Especially harem games and so on, are also then racist, right? Doesn't make any goddamn sense. And of course also these female people are then of course racist, right? Because the thing is that one thing that a lot of people missed out, right? I've seen a few videos discussing this topic, right, of, you know, oh, people are offended about Marin-chan and so on. But honestly, a lot of people missed out on it. They themselves are ignorant, right, on Japanese culture. Because they're like, oh, these people are, you know, oh, they're angry because they're cosplaying, whatever. No. The thing is that, yes, while Marin-chan is a cosplayer, but the general thing is that the Kuro Gyaru is a very, very common, iconic Japanese fashion thing, right? Like here again, this is a very, very common thing. You find a lot of females in reality, right? Look at this. It's not a cosplay thing, okay? It's a fashion thing. It's a cultural fashion thing. And that's why it's much more bigger and dumber to be like, oh, this is racism, right? So this tweet kind of started it. Then of course, some people agree with them. Some people, you know, usually, let's be honest, on the left, right, it's like massive articles. Yes, that's right, Japanese people are racist, you know, and so on, right? But anyway, this person here immediately is, of course, the actual racist, right? And ignorant, especially. But I would even say, so not to be like, you know, oh, this guy's. But I think actually a lot of people then have defended this anime, right? Some other YouTubers almost, right? They are also kind of ignorant because they're defending it in the wrong way. Certainly I agree with them that you can do whatever you want with your body. If you get a tan, you're not a racist, right? And so on. But especially at that this comment here makes no sense. It's not about that Marin has a cosplay, right? Again, it's about fashion. It's about that Kuro Gyaru is a very, very iconic fashion statement. It's a countercultural fashion statement in Japanese culture, right? So you can find thousands of females, especially in Tokyo, right, dressed up like, you know, this kind of how Marin looks, right? And they're not doing it because they're cosplaying, right? They're doing it because that's the fashion they like, right? And whatever that fashion symbolizes for them in their life. So it's nothing to do with actual cosplaying. Certainly you can also cosplay and, you know, tan up or whatever, right? But that's not really what it's about. You have this thing, right, that I call a Gyaru evolution, right? So this is a very, very common thing, especially in, of course, in the family-friendly mangas, right? Hentais, which is like, first you have your mom, you know, she's like a cool, badass mom, right? Then start having a lot of, you know, fun time with some boys, right? She turns into a Gyaru, get a little bigger oppais, and then, you know, a few months later, a year later, she's a Kuro Gyaru, right? So it's a very, very typical trait, and a show coming, right, of like, okay, this female character now is getting more and more slutty, right? That doesn't mean that a Kuro Gyaru in reality or whatever is a slut or whatever, right? But it certainly has kind of that cultural point, right? That being a Kuro Gyaru is usually about, you know, well, openly for sex, right? You know, aggressive female character and so on. And that's also one thing that really, really bugs me with this conversation. And honestly, I don't say it to be like, please share a video, but honestly, well, I think this video should be shared and discussed and so on, right? Because one thing that really, really bugs me for years on Twitter and Reddit and whatever, right? Tumblr and so on, is characters like Hibana here. Right? So here is Hibana. She's a character from Fire Force. This is a Japanese woman, right? Yet on Twitter and so on, you very often see people think it's a black female character, right? But she's not a black woman. She's just like a Gyaru. She's got pink hair. She got pink hair with like fiery highlights, she's like a fire medic, right? And she's almost just a tanned Japanese woman. Her name is, she's a Japanese name, right? And she's a very like sexually, very very like feminine, very like, oh, I want to smash the main character. She's a very horny character for then the main character, right? And so on. She of course is a gairu. She's not a black woman, right? This is not me saying that it's wrong having black female characters in anime, right? I'm just saying that honestly, the most, when I see people say that here's my top 5, female black characters, right? I'm like in anime, I'm like, well, like 4 of them are just gairus. They're not even black characters, they're like Japanese females. So this is a very common issue I see. And then every time you put out that, well, like, but your list here isn't like, none of them are black. They're all Japanese females, right? And they're like, oh, you're a racist. Like, no, I'm just saying that, like, I don't have any issue with black people, right? I'm just saying that that character is a Japanese person, right? And I'll show you later in the video how she's actually a very famous singer. She actually done some Black Clover, to comment later. She almost looks exactly like Hibana, like, seriously. Like Hibana and her, they almost look exactly the same. And so I would say that it probably Hibana's design, right, is based on this very famous singer. So, I will show you later. She's a Japanese, of course, female, and she looks almost exactly like Hibana. And there's another character for that matter, that also looks exactly like Hibana, so it's also important for this discussion later. But anyway, just before briefly go into, more of the topics, right? It's just very common that you find this, like, basically, the gairus, right? So, just before I get into the details here, so you have a gairu in almost like every harem anime these days, right? Or especially harem games, right? This is a game that I found just on Googling today, right? You can see here, there are 4 female characters, right? That the main character can date and so on. And of course, one is a gairu. It's very common, right? And of course, what that means then, especially in like a harem sense, right? In anime and so on, means that usually the gairu is the slut, right? She's like, oh yeah, you wanna do it, yeah. She's the aggressive female character. She's probably the one that is most openly like, oh yeah, I wanna F you, bad boy, She's probably that character, right? So that's such a big difference too. Like seeing a gairu in an anime whatever is a cultural statement, right? It isn't just saying that, oh, here's a black woman, right? No, it's saying that here's a woman that is probably horny, so to speak. That's kind of much more what it's telling you, right? And as I said in my last review of Marin Darling, seeing the typical, transformation, right, of here we have our main character, and she was already a gairu, right? And gairu kind of, she's a little bit of a perv, she likes pervy games and so on, right? And then turning into the Kuro Gyaru is a very typical symbolism of, okay, now Marin-chan went from like, hentai level 2 to hentai level 3, right? And that's kind of what it tells you, right? But anyway, I also want to break down a little bit of different gairus. I had a discussion last week on Reddit, in Dress Up Darling review and so on, right? People that don't really understand the difference between like hime gairu, a hege gairu, and so on, right? Onee gairu and so on. So just because Marin wasn't a Kuro Gyaru before, doesn't mean she wasn't just a gairu. A gairu is the broad umbrella term, right? And then you have the Kuro Gyaru, which is probably the most common gairu fashion of the gairus, right? So let's talk about all these topics here now. First thing I want to put out, right, in this long gairu video here, to explain what the gairu is and Kuro Gyaru and so on, right, is just, again, emphasize this person, right, and simply put, they are the actual racists, okay? They really are, because the issue here is they have zero understanding, right, of other cultures, right? And the main issue is that they have this lens of like, I live in usually, let's say America, right, USA, and they're like, this is the only worldview that exists, right? If you don't have my worldview, you were wrong, right? And they can't even comprehend that other people have other, culture or perspective, whatever, right? So again, when they see a person like this, right, in front of me here, they are like, oh, that person's clearly doing blackface. So like, no, she's doing a sexy gairu. This is a famous actress, right? And she's like, doing a sexy gairu look, right? Kuro Gyaru in particular, right? And again, this actress here, she's kind of famous for, being a little bit, promiscuity, right? And so on. It's of course it makes sense, right? Because the general topic, right, is that gairus, let's be honest here, is seen as genki, aggressive, so on, outgoing, right? Extrovert and so on, right? And of course, and also usually kind of sexualized, right? So it's very common that you find these characters, like this, right, in anime manga, as we talked about. And people don't understand that it's of course the biggest issue of the whole thing, right? Because they're like, well, that woman there is clearly trying to change her race. It's not, thing again, it's nothing to do with race, right? nothing to do with race. It's completely irrelevant. It's about to do mostly with, sex appeal, right? Culture, design, and so on. So if you look, for example, at, Marin, right? She's a typical, high school girl, sexual guy, right? And you can compare it to, for example, a guy at school, right? So of course you have gyros at actual Japanese schools. They are not racist because they are gyros, right? And if they then, like Marin-chan, of course she did temporarily, but if they then go Kuro Gyaru, right? That's usually a more call for sex appeal, right? And one way you can look at it, it's kind of like, imagine thinking about the peacock, right? In the dating scene. Usually for men do it, right? So if you have a man that dresses up, looking kind of, fabulous or whatever, right? At the bar or something, that's a way to try to signal, right? Try to get to do some ladies, right? The Kuro guy, especially then, but also the normal guy, right? Is a way female peacocking, right? To try to seduce guys, right? Because from a cultural notion, what you have to understand is that even if every guy isn't, whatever, right? Super horny or whatever, if you know, because it's a very, very famous fashion in Japan, right? And if you know then that if I dress up as a gyro, men are gonna think that I am, into it, right? That I wanna get some action and so on. So if you dress up at that, you probably want some action, right? And what I mean with that is that this is how every culture actually works, right? If I know that if let's say I go on an interview, right, to get a job, I go like this, right? Because I'm a crazy guy, right? So I honestly has these kind of, clothes on me. But actually, let me explain why, right? So I go to the interviews, usually for design positionings, latest by with the government, but I go for some kind of, design, right, game design, whatever design, right, and so on. So for me, having this kind of background or whatever, and this kind of thing in the interview and that kind of signals that, yeah, I'm a crazy design guy. Look, I made this shirt myself. We got boobs on it. We got some Kuro. Look at that, Yurichi, Miroko. Yeah. But honestly, right, I've done that. Because some people, I don't go to a bank, right? But if I go to like a game studio, right? They're like, oh, this guy, he's into anime, and he gets design, he's cray, right? I'm signaling that, right? But your signaling is very, very important in life, right? And if you dress up as this girl here, right, in a typical high school Japanese, environment, you are signaling that you are probably a slut, right? Let's be honest here, right? That's probably what you're signaling. Or if you aren't that, you're signaling that you're very interested in boys and so on, right? And you don't have to be that, right? But it's kind of like what you're signaling, right? And for example, if you ever watched Citrus, right? That's an anime about a gyro, main character gyro, and she's actually never been with a boy, right? But she's a very, very, gyro, rainbow nails, blonde hair, and all that. And every time someone asks her, right? Oh, have you had sex and so on? She's like, oh yeah, I fucked like 20 guys last week, But of course, so she knows that she has to pretend, right, to be like this super, I sleep with guys all the time, even though she actually never did it, right? Which is an issue for her, because she really wants to do it, but she can't admit, right, to the other characters that she hasn't actually done it, right? Because she wants to be this like badass, cool guy, right? Of course, again, I'm not saying that every guy did. I'm just saying that the cultural standpoint is you're seeing that, right? And it's very important to understand it, right? And this is again back to this image. We have to remember, right, that it's very, very common then in Japanese culture, right, that you have this like evolution of, okay, here's the typical, female, here's the kind of the more horny, the female, and here's the maximum, right? So it's very, very important thing about this evolution, because why otherwise would it be such a common trope in manga and so on, right? You see this evolution of the female character, not always, of course. I'm just saying it's a very, very, very common trope, right? It's cliche, if anything, right, by now. If you read manga and so on for 20 years. This character has been done like to death almost, right? And of course then back to Hibana, right? Hibana is an example of a Fire Force character that I've seen people many times believe is not Japanese, but she's a Japanese woman. She's symbolizing, she's thirsty, right, for the main character. And this woman here is also a Kuro guy, right? She's not, doing black. No, she's just doing Japanese fashion. Same thing here. It's very common Japanese fashion. It's like extremely common. But what is really important to understand, right, and why it's also really comedic and ironic, people try to cancel Marin-chan, right, is because the gyro, and especially then of course the Kuro gyro or the ganguro is of course a counter culture, right? Because Japan, is very rigid, right? Japan's very conservative. Japan is very much, you dress like this, right? you do this thing and so on, right? You dress up in suit and so on. And of course, Japan has very rigid, usually then, for how females should dress up and so on too, right? They just had this new weird pony law thing, right? Where schoolgirls can't have their hair around, something like that. That's very, very much right how Japan is, right? Very conservative. So the Gyaru is then anti that, right? Because the Gyaru is very open, right? She shows her oppies, right? She has piercing and so on. She shows the shit, right? She's showing her panties, right? You know what I mean? She's a very, very anti the establishment, right? So that's what I think is funny too, or being ironically funny, that these people are trying to cancel a very like anti, what they should hate, right? Because imagine this, right? These people that hate on Marin-chan, right? They're probably on the left mostly, right? And they probably hate, the patriarchy and stuff, right? The Gyaru is an anti-patriarchal culture in Japan. It's anti the classic conservative Japanese culture. So it's really, really ironic, I would say again, right? That these people then, usually then white people in America, is like, oh, look at those, Kuro guys in Japan. Well, clearly racist, we gotta cancel them. When these females are kind of anti, the patriarchal structure of Japan, right? It's just ridiculous. But anyway, yeah, it's like freaking counter culture, okay, to the Japanese rigid culture. And all of the traits you see then, right, of course, is that, about Yakuza, right? Yakuza have tattoos and so on, it's not illegal tattoos in Japan, but usually seen that you can't enter an onsen and so on, right, if you have tattoos. Or it is to miss then, you are of course, a gangster or whatever, right? And so what do guys have? Well, of course, a lot of Gyros have tattoos, right? They have piercing, they get tattoos, and that's of course why they have the strong use of color, right? So they get this very, very, like rainbow hair, blonde hair, gold hair, right? Red hair and so on, right? Because normally, of course, you should have to use black hair in Japan, right? And then they get the Kuro Gyaru thing, right? That makes their hair and so on and skin stand out more, right? And like get the different form, right, from the normal episode. And then they also get tattoos and so on, right? So again, then, if you talk about the typical evolution, right, from the female character in manga and so on, right, which it goes more and more hentai and so on, right? Of course, it's very, very common that we see them also, develop similar traits, right? To get, as I talked about, to get more and more Kuro Gyaru, they might get bigger oppies or whatever, right? But also commonly, as you can see here, they might get an earring, right? They might get piercing. It's very, very common, right? So the whole thing too, that you get tattoos and so on, right? Actually more comes from that stigma, right? Of the Yakuza, right? And other, criminal stuff, right? Because, yeah, who has tattoos? Well, Yakuza, right? Well, and Gyros, right? Again, it's a counter culture because they get the tattoos, they get the piercing and so on, not because they're criminal, not because they're anything to do with Yakuza, but because they know that tattoos is seen as, of course, like, oh, they're criminals, right? Oh, well, then I get a tattoo because then I'm like a sexy, badass girl, right? So that's, of course, very, very important. Important to think about that the Gyaru, not necessarily is about, sex or whatever, right? But also about just being, like, extrovert, right? So the guy originally kind of comes from the Valley Girl, right? Talk about tattoos and so on. So they kind of looked at, American culture, right? Mostly then in California, right? Cali, and they're like, okay, they have like the sexy outfits, they get tan, right? They get, this hair and so on, right? That's kind of where it comes from. And the thing is that if you're living in Japan, right? Having basically, colorful clothing and stuff and so on, right? Major stands out, right? So first of all, is to point out that, of course, the Gyaru fashion thing, right, comes from basically wanting to be extrovert, right, want to stick out, but also again then the anti-culture, whatever, right, counterculture and so on, right, but inspired then, right, by the American fashion zone. Well, now let's get some fashion stuff. So here is Koda Kumi. She's a very famous Japanese singer, done anime openings, gaming stuff like fans and so on for many years, and as you can see, she and Hibana looks incredibly similar, right? Like they have the same hair color basically. She's a little, same skin, same body type. She's incredibly similar to Hibana, right? And as I mentioned earlier, I would say Hibana is probably homage to her, right? She looks incredibly similar to her, and she's very famous Kuro Gyaru, right? But if you show an image of someone to the left here, would they think that this woman is a black woman? No, they would think that she's probably like Asian, something, right? The right picture, that's just the anime version of her, right? That's just the animification of Koda Kumi. Yeah, her boobs are slightly bigger, right? Her eyes are some kind of cross symbol, right? So kind of weirdness, right? Because of the anime. Her hair was a little more, sparkly or whatever, right? And she got fire powers. But that is the anime version of this famous singer. That's seriously what it is. And she's, for example, then the singer of Berklo 4, right? And you can see her here, she's quite famous for doing this kind of like Kuro Gyaru looks, right? Very revealing outfits, someone like I talked about it. But the guy is usually seen as a very, promiscuity, very open to, family friends stuff and so on. Yeah, very open to stuff, right? And, of course, a famous singer then has adopted that kind of, dressing code or whatever, right? To, of course, get, market appeal, right? It's just like a very, very thing. The thing is, women's are racist because she dresses up in, openly clothing, showing her, not being naked, but like, showing her cleavage or whatever, right? And having like a strong tan and having like either golden hair or pink hair and so on. Does that make her a race? It's just crazy talk. No, she's just goddamn fashion, and she's one of the symbols of this fashion, right? It's Jesus Christ. I had a discussion last week on Reddit, trying to explain different gyros. So, let's just talk about more than fashion here. So, a gyro then is the umbrella term of course, this kind of girls with, again, counterculture, right? Usually have blonde or pink or whatever hair against the black hair, right? They have rainbow nails or whatever, colorful nails, long nails and so on, right? Depending on that. The clothes, of course, are usually very extrovert, very showing, might show some cleave, might show some pantsu, right? Short skirts, etc. The different versions of it, right? But that's kind of the general gyro. And then you have different guys. So you have the Kuro Gyaru, you have the hime gyro, etc, 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 right? You have onee gyro, hige gyro, and so on. I'm going to talk all about here. My point is just that, from a dress-up doll standpoint here then, of course, Marin is a gyro, right? She's kind of like the basic, schoolgirl gyro, right? She's kind of like, she's kind of like this, This is basically Marin, right? Basically, the first level of a gyro. She hasn't really specified, I suppose, what she is as a gyro. She's kind of the general gyro, sparkly hair, some nails or whatever, right? And the episode then, she turned into a Kuro Gyaru, right? That's basically what it is, right? She went from schoolgirl gyro, which is the basic form of a guy, I suppose, and then now she's more like the tan, right? A little more sexy, and you were supposed to probably get tattoos or whatever. So this is kind of Marin, right? She's the, again, typical schoolgirl gyro, and then she turned into, the more sex appeal focused Kuro Gyaru, right? And obviously the author knows what they are doing, right? Because they know that in Japanese culture, the Kuro Gyaru is seen as more of basically horny, right, than the basic gyro. So they know that, okay, now I can even push on the sex appeal even more, right? May show some butt scene or whatever, yeah. Now I can even go further, right, with the character, because it's gonna make sense from a cultural notion, right? It's gonna make sense, and then people are gonna accept it. People don't know this culture and be like, oh yeah, that makes sense, that makes a lot of sense. And this is basically a trope by now, right? Because you have, for example, here's Hiban again, right? Fire Force, focus on her, and here's one of the sexy moms from Don't You Love Your Mother. And as you see, this character is almost the exact same character. They both have pink hair, they're Kuro Gyarus, right? Again, nothing to do with race, it's to do with appeal, right? Fashion appeal, being, sexy or whatever, yeah. That is the goddamn thing, right? Both the female characters are focused on, having their own, male harem, right? The reverse or whatever, right? And they both have a kind of sexy power and so on. And for that matter then, the woman to the right here, right? She is from, again then, this Alabama Mama anime, right? Which is about the mother who's trying to be with her son, in a weird way all the time, right? And she's one of the other moms then, right? So of course she's a very, 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 focused on basically being a hentai mom, right? And interesting enough, what I bring up to is of course when she loses the fight, to the main mom, she actually de-gyrus. So she loses the fight in this anime, loses her powers and her sex powers or whatever, right? To all these men, she actually loses her gyro look. So this is kind of like a, somewhat extrovert female character, right? But she actually loses her gyro appearance. That's how clear this anime is. That not only did she lose her magical power, right? She lost her sex appeal, right? You know what I mean? She lost the sex power, because this anime is all about sex, right? So she lost the power now. She used to be a gyro milf, and now she's a milf, right? So that's incredibly clear that the author is like, this is what it means, right, to be like a gyro. For example, again, right, when I see these milf character in a storytelling, right, this tells me, is again the cultural signaling, right? It tells me that this is, a very like thirsty mommy, right? This don't tell me that, oh, this is a black woman. No, it tells me that this is a Japanese woman. There's a gyro. She's a milf, and she really want to get on. She want to seduce the character right there. So that's why it's a huge difference too, right? Because people that keep claiming that this character are black or whatever, this doesn't make any sense because it's not just about race, right? It's about the cultural notion of what is this design telling you. Well, if you see a character looking like this in an anime, right, you know that this character is probably like a thirsty character, right? And that's why it's just a big difference. Because again, you see the image here, you don't think that, oh yeah, this is a black woman, no, black milf. No, you think, oh, this is a gyaru milf, ergo meaning that, oh yeah, this is a very horny gyaru or milf, you know. That's what it's telling you, right? It's a big difference than just telling you whatever how she looks, right? Because how you looks is telling a story, right? It's telling it's a meaning to it, right? And it is really honestly important, right, in Japanese manga and anime games on storytelling, right? Because the gyaru is usually the airhead woman that wants to do it, right? And that's actually a really important storytelling moment. Because, for example, in Savage Girls in season, which is one of the best animes ever, or Maiden Go, whatever it's called in English, amazing anime. I recommend heavily, best anime that year. There is a gyaru, this is a very minor spoiler, but yeah, there's a gyaru, she befriends the president of the club, and she's a very sweet girl, right? But also, she gets pregnant, okay? So, I'm not saying that, you know, in real life, every Kuro Gyaru is, you know, going around sleeping with every man, right? But I'm saying that that is the cultural notion, right, in a manga and anime. That, yeah, the gyaru, she gets around, right? Why is the gyaru getting pregnant? Well, because it's like, you know, that's how it is, right? And everyone can accept that. Because when you're writing a storytelling, you're gonna have, like, you know, a teenage pregnancy in Japan, right? Well, you probably pick the gyaru, because it's easier to understand, right? So the viewer can just be like, oh yeah, it makes sense. Of course, it's a gyaru. They do it, right? Of course, it's a very culture in Japan, right? But it makes sense because the viewer can then easily accept what's happening in the storyline. You see this gyaru, she's very friendly, she's very nice, she has a really well-written character, of course, it's an amazing anime. But it's also a way for the author to tell you that, well, she's probably having a lot of sex, right? And, oh, she's pregnant now. She's 17 or whatever, 18 and is pregnant, yeah. And you accept that. Because, yeah, of course, she's the, you know, she's the something gyaru. So it's a way of the author to, you know, minimize, screen time, right? Or minimize exposition, right? Of the characters. And that's why it's so important. And again, this is like one of the biggest tropes ever in anime, right? And you see it in a bunch of other animes. Okay, for example, Dumbbell, Hibiki, I have behind me, right? Hibiki, yeah, again, a classic, you know, Kuro Gyaru, right? What's her goal? Her goal is to go to the gym. This is an anime about, you know, exercise, right? Her goal is to go to the gym to get sexier, right? She wants to train to get, you know, less fat, bigger muscles, you know, slimmer body. Why? Because she wants to have sex, right? That's a whole storyline, really. The whole premise is she wants to be hotter so she can get a boyfriend because she wants to have a lot of, you know, fun time with a boyfriend. That's like the whole premise of Dumbbell in a nutshell. And all the other girls basically it's the one muscle girl, but the other girls are also like, yeah, they, you know, yeah, but that's the premise, is that she's a horny gyaru, right? That's the whole goddamn premise. That she likes to eat a lot of food to her, so she gets fat and she has to like, slim down all the time, right? You know? And when Marin-chan then normally looks like, you know, yeah, a sexy gyaru, right? Turning into a Kuro Gyaru. And obviously, again, the author knows what they're doing. The author knows that now I'm gonna do even more sex jokes, right? You know, because yeah, this is what happened, right? Kuro Gyaru, let's do a little more of that stuff, right? And when we go back then to this classic annoying tweet, right? Again, this person has no idea what it means because they're like cosplay scene. The cosplay is important here. Yes, Marin-chan happens to be a cosplay in the anime, but it's a whole fashion thing, right? It's a storytelling. It's a cultural notion that this female character now went from, like, you know, perv level 1 to perv level 2, whatever, yeah. Like they're increasing in, you know, the sex power, right? That's what this is telling us. They're not telling us that she wants to change race or whatever, right? It's telling us that, again, that's happening. And it's not about, you know, actually cosplaying, right? It's more about that thing. It just happens to be in this anime's context that she's cosplaying. But that's not really what the author is telling us, right? So speak from like an actual, you know, characterization of what we usually see in other manga and anime and so. And again, it comes back to the last point. Yeah. And again, this comes back to the main point, right? A Kuro Gyaru is just a fashion statement. And think about this now. Veronica, that Marin-chan's cosplaying as in the recent arc, isn't even black, right? That female character with the big underboob that Marin-chan likes, she's supposed to be a Kuro Gyaru, right? Like many other characters are in, for example, she looks like, you know, a guilty character or so on, right? And most of them aren't supposed to be, you know, non-Japanese. They're supposed to be Japanese, right? Just with, you know, a Kuro Gyaru style, right? So Marin-chan isn't even changing her race to be another character in a cosplay event. She's actually just, like, you know, Kuro Gyaruing up, right, to be another kind of Gyaru in another game. So it's just ridiculous. And then we have, for that matter again, as mentioned her, Nagatoro, you know, best girl. Where is she, right? I would say it's the last point. Nagatoro is kind of weird. This is the tomboy, you know, Kuro style, right? So it's very common in anime that the tomboy, as Nagatoro, I've seen Bokuben and so on, they're very muscular, right? They're very slim and they train a lot. Because they swim a lot in a lot of animes, right? With the tomboys, they get a lot of, you know, Kuro appearance, right? And Nagatoro, her friends are certainly Gyarus. So she's kind of like a borderline, you know. She's very much, yeah, she got the piercing and so on. She's very like borderline. But basically, I would say Nagatoro is, you know, half Gyaru, half tomboy, right? And you also have the Yankee and so on, right? So you can be like a Yankee Gyaru, you can be a tomboy Yankee, right? Which is the same thing. You can be of course, a tomboy Gyaru, right? That's kind of what Nagatoro is. But of course, she's cancelled too, right? Because man, she got freaking dark skin, man. Anyway, guys, that's the video. Please share the video, subscribe, and so on. I'll see you guys later with, of course, the actual Marin, you know, Dress Up Darling and so on video review and actually coming out tonight. But again, I really want to emphasize, right, that it's ridiculous to me because a person has this kind of appearance, right, doesn't mean they're trying to be another race, right? It's just a goddamn fashion thing in Japan, which has, again, then important to understand there's a cultural notion to it, what is signaling, right? Like I mentioned earlier, I might actually go dressed up inside to a job interview, because I might go to like a game design interview, right? And they're like, oh man, this guy, he's a crazy design guy, look at his own t-shirt, and oh yeah, the plus points in the book, you know? Where if I go to a bank, right, I'm gonna have to suit up and dress up, so on, yeah. And if you go outside in Japan, right, with a very, you know, suit up, very conservative culture, right, most females, think about that. I said the last thing here actually, right. While the Gyarus, of course, and the Kuro Gyaru and so on, is very, very common in Japan, right? It's a common notion of an iconic fashion statement. The population percentage of Gyaru is pretty low, right? Because it is, you know, a counterculture, right? So while it's a very, very like iconic and everyone kind of knows what a Gyaru is in Japan, right? But you have typically, like in the most anime, it's like one girl in the class, right? She's the Gyaru, you know, like 1 out of 20 is the Gyaru, right? So that's 5%. But it's a very, very, I mean, it's common as a frequency, right? But it's not common as in high population or Gyarus. So it's a very like, yeah, it's very easy to find, you know, Kuro guys or whatever if you're in Tokyo or so on. But in like the, you know, kind of smaller cities, right, it's kind of harder, right? So that's the important thing about too, that it's just that everyone knows that, well, if you dress up like a guy, right, you get this stuff, you show your, you know, whatever, tatas or people know what you're about, right? But again, mostly it comes from an extroversion, right? It comes from this like, I want to stick out, I want to be different than the typical norm, right? And it's also, again, why I find it so funny, as I mentioned earlier, ironically sad funny, right? These people are complaining about, oh no, these females are, you know, racism or whatever, right? When they are actually arguably like fighting the evil Japanese patriarch, right? If anything, these typical, I would say, or most time leftists, right, should really be positive about the Gyarus, because they're kind of the, you know, the bra burning, they're kind of like that kind of cats, right? They're kind of like the females in reality, they're kind of fighting, right, against the typical norms. Like I said earlier, you know, Japan just had this new idea that they're gonna like ban the ponytail, right? Oh no, it's too sexy, you can see the nape of the girl, so we're gonna do this. That is how, you know, Japanese society can be, right? And then of course the Gyaru is a woman that's like, screw that, I'm gonna have a low skirt, I'm gonna show my titties, I'm gonna do this thing and so on, right? So they're very much like fighting that kind of oppressive culture, right, in their own viewpoint. So I also find that's like sad, right, in that sense, right? That these typical, like, you know, I guess privileged, usually people on the left in America are like, these women, it's complete ignorance, right? And of course show that they are the actual racists. But anyway, subscribe, please share the video, guys, and have a great day.